The Werewolf by Clemence Housman. The great farm hall was ablaze with the firelight, and noisy with laughter and talk of many sounding words. None could be idle but the very young and the very old. Little Roll, who was hugging a puppy, and old Trella, whose palsied hand fumbled over her knitting. The early evening had closed in, and the farm servants, come from their outdoor work, had assembled in the ample hall, which gave space for a score or more of workers. Several of the men were engaged in carving, and to those were yielded the best place and light. Others made or repaired fishing tackle and harness, and a great sign net occupied 3 pairs of hands. Of the women, most were sorting and mixing eider, feather, and chopping straw to add to it. Looms were there, though not in present use, but 3 wheels whirred emulously, and the finest and swiftest thread of the 3 ran between the fingers of the house mistress. Near her were some children, busy too, plaiting wicks for candles and lamps. Each group of workers had a lamp in its center, and those farthest from the fire had live heat from 2 braziers filled with glowing wood embers, replenished now and again from the generous hearth. But the flicker of the great fire was manifest to remotest corners, and prevailed beyond the limits of the weaker lights. Little Roll grew tired of his puppy, dropped it incontinently, and made an onslaught on Tyr, the old wolfhound who basked dozing, whimpering and twitching in his hunting dreams. Prone went Roll beside Tyr, his young arms around the shaggy neck, his curls against the black jaw. Tyr gave a perfunctory lick and stretched with a sleepy sigh. Roll growled and rolled and shoved invitingly, but could only gain from the old dog placid toleration and a half-observant blink. "Take that, then," said Roll, indignant at this ignoring of his advances, and set the puppy sprawling against the dignity that disdained him as playmate. The dog took no notice, and the child wandered off to find amusement elsewhere. The baskets of white eider feathers caught his eye, far off in a distant corner. He slipped under the table and crept along on all fours, the ordinary commonplace custom of walking down a room upright not being to his fancy. When close to the woman, he lay still for a moment, watching with his elbows on the floor and his chin in his palms. One of the women, seeing him, nodded and smiled, and presently he crept out behind her skirts and passed, hardly noticed, from one to another, till he found opportunity to possess himself of a large handful of feathers. With these he traversed the length of the room, under the table again, and emerged near the spinners. At the feet of the youngest he curled himself round, sheltered by her knees from the observation of the others, and disarmed her of interference by secretly displaying his handful with a confiding smile. A dubious nod satisfied him, and presently he started on the play he had devised. He took a tuft of the white down, and gently shook it free of his fingers, close to the whir of the wheel. The wind of the swift motion took it, spun it round and round in winding circles, till it floated above like a slow white moth. Little Roll's eyes danced, and the rows of his small white teeth shone in a silent laugh of delight. Another and another of the white tufts was set whirling round, like a winged thing in a spider's web, and floating clear at last. Presently the handful filled. Roll sprawled forward to survey the room and contemplate another journey under the table. His shoulder thrusting forward checked the wheel for an instant. He shifted hastily. The wheel flew with a jerk, and the thread snapped. "Naughty Roll," said the girl. The swiftest wheel stopped also, and the house mistress, Roll's aunt, leaned forward, and sighting the low curly head, gave a warning against mischief, and sent him out to old Trella's corner. Roll obeyed, and after a discreet period of obedience, sidled out again down the length of the room, farthest from his aunt's eye. As they slipped in among the men, they looked up to see that their tools might be as far as possible out of Roll's reach and close to their own. Nevertheless, before long, he managed to secure a fine chisel and take off its point on the leg of the table. The carver strong objections to this concerted Roll, who for 5 minutes thereafter effaced himself under the table. During this seclusion, he contemplated the many pairs of legs that surrounded him, and almost shut the light of the fire. How very odd some of the legs were. Some were carved where they should be straight, some were straight where they should be curved, and as Roll said to himself, they all seemed screwed on differently. Some were tucked away modestly under the benches, others were thrust out far under the table, encroaching on Roll's own particular domain. He stretched out his own short legs and regarded them critically. and at the comparison favorably. Why were not all legs made like his or like his? These legs approved by Roll were a little apart from the rest. He crawled opposite and made comparison. His face grew quite solemn as he thought of the innumerable days to come before his legs could be as long as strong. He hoped they would be just like those, his models, as straight as to bone, as carved as to muscle. A few moments later, Swin of the long legs felt a small hand caressing his foot, and looking down, met the upturned eyes of his little cousin Roll, lying on his back, still softly patting and stroking the young man's foot. The child was quiet and happy for a good while. He watched the movement of the strong, deft hands and the shifting of the bright tools. Now and then, minute chips of wood, puffed out off by Swen, fell down upon his face. At last he raised himself very gently, lest a jog should wake impatience in the carver, and crossed his own legs around Swin's ankle, clasping with his arms too, laid his head against the knee. Such act is evidence of a child's most wonderful hero worship. Quite content was Roll, and more than content when Swen paused a minute to joke and pat his head and pull his curls. Quiet he remained as long as quiescence is possible to limbs young as his. Swen forgot he was near, hardly noticed when his leg was gently released, and never saw the stealthy abstraction of one of his tools. 10 minutes thereafter was a lamentable wail from low on the floor, rising to the full pitch of Roll's healthy lungs, for his hands was gashed across, and the copious bleeding terrified him. Then there was soothing and comforting, washing and binding, and a modicum of scolding, till the loud outcry sank into occasional sobs, and the child, tear-stained and subdued, was returned to the chimney-corner settle, where Trella nodded. In the reaction after pain and fright, Roll found that the quiet of that firelit corner was to his mind. Tear, too, disdained him no longer, but, roused by his sobs, showed all the concern and sympathy that a dog can by licking and wistful watching. A little shame weighed also upon his spirits. He wished he had not cried quite so much. He remembered how once Swin had come home with his arm torn down from the shoulder and a dead bear, and how he had never winced nor said a word, though his lips turned white with pain. Poor little Roll gave another sighing sob over his own faint-hearted shortcomings. The light and motion of the great fire began to tell strong stories to the child, and the wind in the chimney roared a corroborative note now and then. The great black mouth of the chimney, impending high over the hearth, received as into a mysterious, gulfy, murky coils of smoke and brightness of aspiring sparks. And beyond, in the high darkness, were muttering and wailing and strange doings, so that sometimes the smoke rushed back in panic and crawled out and up to the roof, and condensed itself in invisibility among the rafters, and then the wind would rage over its lost prey, and rush round the house, rattling and shrieking at window and door. In a lull after one such loud gust, Roll lifted his head in surprise and listened. A lull had also come on the babble of talk, and thus could be heard with strange distinctness a sound outside the door. The sound of a child's voice, a child's hands. "Open, open, let me in," piped a little voice from low down, lower than the handle, and the latch rattled as though a tiptoed child reached up to it, and soft small knocks were struck. One near the door sprang up and opened it. "No one is there," he said. Tyr lifted his head and gave utterance to a howl, loud, prolonged, almost dismal. Swen, not able to believe that his ears had deceived him, got up and went to the door. It was a dark night. The clouds were heavy with snow that had fallen fitfully when the wind lulled. Untrodden snow lay up to the perch. There was no sight nor sound of any human being. Swen strained his eyes far and near, only to see dark sky, pure snow, and a line of black fir trees on a hill brow, bowing before the wind. It must have been the wind, he said, and closed the door. Many faces looked scared. The sound of a child's voice had been so distinct in the words, "Open, open, let me in." The wind might have creaked the wood or rattled the latch, but could not speak with a child's voice, nor knock with the soft, plain blows of a plump fist gives. And the strange, unusual howl of the wolfhound was an omen to be feared, be the rest what it might. Strange things were said one another, till the rebuke of the house mistress called them into far-off whispers. For a time after there was uneasiness, constraint, and silence. Then the chill fear thawed by degrees, and the babble of talk flowed on again. Yet half an hour later, a very slight noise outside the door sufficed to arrest every hand, every tongue. Every head was raised, every eye fixed in one direction. "It is Christian, he is late," said Swen. No, not this feeble shuffle, not a young man's tread. With the sound of uncertain feet came the hard tap-tap of a stick against the door, and the high-pitched voice of Eld. "Open, open, let me in." Again Tyr flung up his head in a long, doleful howl. Before the echo of the tapping stick and the high voice had fairly died away, Swin had sprung across to the door and flung it wide. "No one again," he said in a steady voice, though his eyes looked startled as he stared out. He saw the lonely expanse of snow, the clouds swagging low, and between the two the line of dark firs bowing in the wind. He closed the door without a word of comment and recrossed the room. A score of blanched faces were turned to him as though he must be solver the enigma. He could not be unconscious of this mute-eyed questioning, and it disturbed his restless air of composure. He hesitated to glance towards his mother, the house mistress, then back at the frightened folk, and gravely before them all made the sign of the cross. There was a flutter of hands as the sign was repeated by all, and the dead silence was stirred as by a huge sigh, for the held breath of many was read as though the sign gave magic relief. Even the house mistress was perturbed. She left her wheel and crossed the room to her son, and spoke with him for a moment in a low tone that none could overhear. But a moment later her voice was high-pitched and loud, so that all might benefit from her rebuke of the heathen chatter of one of the girls. Perhaps she essayed to silence thus her own misgivings and forebodings. No other voice dared speak now that this natural fullness. Low tones made intermittent murmurs, and now and then silence drifted over the whole room. The handling of tools was as noiseless as might be, and suspended on the instant the door rattled in a gust of wind. After a time, Swin left his work, joined the group nearest the door, and loitered there on the pretense of giving advice and help to the unskillful. A man's tread was heard outside in the porch. "Christian," said Sven and his mother simultaneously. He confidentially, she authoritatively, to set the check wheels going again, but Tara flung up his head with an appalling howl. "Open, open, let me in." It was a man's voice, and the door shook and rattled as a man's strength beat against it. Sven could feel the planks quivering, as on the instant his hand was upon the door, flinging it open, to face the blank porch, and beyond only snow and sky, and firs aslant in the wind. He stood for a long moment with the open door in his hand. The bitter wind swept in with its icy chill, but a deadlier chill of fear came swifter, and seemed to freeze the beating of his heart. Sven stepped back to snatch up a great bearskin cloak. "Sven, where are you going?" "No further than the porch, mother." He stepped out and closed the door. He wrapped himself in the heavy fur, and leaning against the most sheltered wall of the porch, and stilled his nerves to face the devil and all his works. No sound of voices came from within. The most distinct sound was the crackle and roar of the fire. It was bitterly cold. His feet grew numb, but he forebore stamping them into warmth, lest the sound should strike panic within. Nor would he leave the porch. No print of footmark on the untrodden white that declared so absolutely how no human voices and hands could have approached the door since snow fell 2 hours or more ago. When the wind drops, there will be more snow, thought Sven. For the best part of an hour he kept his watch and saw no living thing, heard no unwanted sound. "I will freeze here no longer," he muttered and re-entered. One woman gave a half-suppressed scream as his hand was laid on the latch, and then a gasp of relief as he came in. No one questioned him, only his mother said, in a tone of forced unconcern, "Could you not see Christian coming?" as though she were made anxious only by the absence of her younger son. Hardly had Swern stamped near to the fire than clear knocking was heard at the door. Tyr leapt from the harp, his eyes red as the fire, his fangs showing white in the black jaw, his neck rigid and bristling, and over-leaping roll ramped at the door, barking furiously. Outside the door, a clear, mellow voice was calling. Tyr's bark made the words undistinguishable. No one offered to stir towards the door before Sven. He stalked down the room resolutely, lifted the latch, and swung back the door. A white-robed woman glided in. No wraith, living, beautiful, young. Tyr leapt upon her. Lithely she balked the sharp fangs with folds of her long fur robe, and snatching from her a girdle, a small two-edged axe, whirled it up for a blow of defiance. Sven caught the dog by the collar and dragged him off, yelling and struggling. The stranger stood in the doorway motionless, one foot set forward, one arm flung up, till the house mistress hurried down the room, and Sven relinquishing to others the furious terror, turning again to close the door and offer excuse for so fierce a greeting. Then she lowered her arm, slung the axe in its place at her waist, loosened the furs about her face, and shook over her shoulders the long white robe, as if it were the sway of one movement. She was a maiden, tall and very fair. The fashion of her dress was strange, half masculine, yet not unwomanly. A fine fur tunic, reaching but little below the knee, was all the skirt she wore. Below were the cross-bound shoes and leggings that a hunter wears. A white fur cap was set low on the brows, and from its edge strips of fur fell lappet-wise about her shoulders. Two of these at her entrance had been drawn forward and crossed about her throat, but now loosened and thrust back, left unhidden long plaits of fair hair, They lay forward on shoulder and breast, down to the ivory-studded girdle where the axe gleamed. Sven and his mother led the stranger to a hearth, without question or sign of curiosity, till she voluntarily told her tale of a long journey to distant kindred, a promised guide unmet, and signals and landmarks mistaken. "Alone!" exclaimed Sven in astonishment. "Have you journeyed thus far 100 leagues alone?" She answered yes with a little smile. "Over the hills and the wastes, why the folk there are savage and wild as beasts." She dropped her hand upon her axe with a laugh of some scorn. "I fear neither man nor beast. Some few fear me." And then she told strange tales of fierce attack and defense, and of the bold, free huntress life she had led. Her words came a little slowly and deliberately, as though she spoke in a scarce familiar tongue. Now and then she hesitated and stopped in a phrase, as though for lack of some word. She became the center of a group of listeners. The interest she excited dissipated. In some degree, the dread inspired by the mysterious voices. There was nothing ominous about this young, bright, fair reality, though her aspect was strange. Little Roll crept near, staring at the stranger with all his might. Unnoticed, he softly stroked and patted a corner of her soft white robe that reached to the floor in ample folds. He laid his cheek against it caressingly, then edged up close to her knees. "What is your name?" he asked. The stranger's smile and ready answer as she looked down saved Roll from the rebuke merited by his unmanly question. "My real name," she said, "would be uncouth to your ears and tongue. The folk of this country have given me another name, and from this," she laid her hand on the fur robe, "they call me White Fell." Little Roll repeated it to himself, stroking and patting as before. "White Fell, White Fell." The fair face and soft, beautiful dress pleased Roll. He knelt up with his eyes on her face and an air of uncertain determination, like a robin's on a doorstep, and plumped his elbows into her lap with a little gasp at his own audacity. "Roll!" exclaimed his aunt, but "Oh, let him," said Whitefell, smiling and stroking his head, and Roll stayed. He advanced further, and panting had his own adventurousness in the face of his aunt's authority, climbed up onto her knees. Her welcoming arms hindered any protest. He nestled happily, fingering the axe head, the ivory stud in her girdle, the ivory clasp at her throat, the plaits of fair hair, rubbing his head against the softness of her fur-clad shoulder, with a child's full confidence in the kindness of beauty. Whitefell had not uncovered her head, only knotted the pendant fur loosely behind her neck. Roll reached up his hand towards it, whispering her name to himself, "Whitefell, Whitefell," then slid his arms round her neck and kissed her once, twice. She laughed delightedly and kissed him again. "The child plays you?" said Swain. "No, indeed," she answered, with an earnestness so intense as to seem disproportionate to the occasion. Roll settled himself again on her lap, and began to unwind the bandage bound round his hand. He paused a little while he saw where the blood had soaked through, then went on till his hand was bare and the cut displayed. Gaping and long, though only skin deep, he held it up towards Whitefell, desirous of her pity and sympathy. At sight of it, in the blood-stained linen, she drew in her breath, suddenly, clasped Raoul to her, hard till he began to struggle. Her face was hidden behind the boy, so that none could see its expression. It had lighted up with the most awful glee. Afar, beyond the fir grove, beyond the low hill behind, the absent Christian was hastening his return. From daybreak he had been on foot, carrying notice of a bear hunt to all the best hunters of the farms and hamlets that lay within a radius of 12 miles. Nevertheless, having been detained till a late hour, he now broke into a run, going with a long, smooth stride of apparent ease that fast made the miles diminish. He entered the midnight blackness of the fir grove with scarcely slackened pace, though the path was invisible, and passing through into the open again, sighted the farm lying a furlong off down the slope. Then he sprang out freely, and almost on the instant gave one great sideways leap and stood still. There in the snow was the track of a great wolf. His hand went to his knife, his only weapon. He stooped and knelt down to bring his eyes to the level of the beast, and peered about, his teeth set. His heart beat a little harder than the pace of his running insisted on. A solitary wolf, nearly always savage and of large size, is a formidable beast that will not hesitate to attack a single man. This wolf track was the largest Christian had ever seen, and so far as he could judge, recently made. It led from under the fir trees down the slope. Well for him, he thought, was the delay that had so vexed him before. Well for him that he had not passed through the dark fir grove when that danger of jaws lurked there. Going warily, he followed the track. It led down the slope, across a broad ice-bound stream, along the level beyond, making towards the farm. A less precise knowledge had doubted and guessed that here might have come strange or his like, but Christian was sure, knowing better than mistake between footmark of dog and wolf. Straight on towards the farm, Surprised and anxious grew Christian that a prowling wolf should dare so near. He drew his knife and pressed on more hastily, more keen-eyed. Oh, that terror were with him. Straight on, even to the very door, where the snow filled. His heart seemed to give a giant leap and then stop. There the track ended. Nothing lurked in the porch, and there was no sign of return. The first stood straight against the sky. The clouds lay low, for the wind had fallen and a few snowflakes came drifting down. In a horror surprised, Christian stood dazed a moment. Then he lifted the latch and went in. His glance took in all the old familiar forms and faces, and with them that of a stranger, fur-clad and beautiful. The awful truth flashed upon him. He knew what she was. Only a few were startled by the rattle of the latch as he entered. The room was filled with bustle and movement, for it was the supper hour when all tools were laid aside, and trestles and tables shifted. Christian had no knowledge of what he said and did. He moved and spoke mechanically, half thinking that soon he must wake from his horrible dream. Sven and his mother supposed him to be cold and dead tired, and spared all unnecessary questions. And he found himself seated beside the hearth, opposite that dreadful thing that looked like a beautiful girl, watching her with every movement, curdling with horror to see her fondle the child roll. Sven stood near them both, intent upon White Phil also, but how differently. She seemed unconscious of the gaze of both, neither aware of the child dread in the eyes of Christian, nor of Sven's warm admiration. These two brothers, who were twins, contrasted greatly, despite their striking likeness. They were alike in regular profile, fair brown hair, and deep blue eyes, but Sven's features were perfect as a young god's, while Christian's showed faulty details. Thus the line of his mouth was set too straight, the eyes shelved too deeply black, and the contour of the face flowed in less generous curves than Sven's. Their height was the same, but Christian was too slender for perfect proportion, while Sven's well-knit frame, broad shoulders, and muscular arms made him preempt for manly beauty as well as for strength. As a hunter, Sven was without rival. As a fisher, without rival. All the countryside acknowledged him to be the best wrestler, rider, dancer, singer. Only in speed could he be surpassed, and that only by his younger brother. All others Sven could distance fairly, but Christian could outrun him easily. Aye, he could keep pace with Sven's most breathless bursts, and laugh and talk the while. Christian took little pride in his fleetness of foot, counting a man's legs to be the least worthy of his members. He had no envy of his brother's athletic superiority, though to several feats he had made a moderate second. He loved as only a twin can love, proud of all that Sven did, content with all that Sven was. Humbly content also that his own great love should not be so exceedingly returned, since he knew himself to be so far less love-worthy. Christian dared not, in the midst of women and children, launch the horror that he knew into words. He waited to consult his brother, but Sven did not or would not notice the signal he made, and kept his face always turned toward White Fell. Christian drew away from the hearth, unable to remain passive with that dread upon him. "Where is Tyr?" he said suddenly. Then, catching sight of the dog in a distant corner, "Why is she chained there?" "He flew at the stranger," one answered. Christian's eyes glowed. "Yes?" he said interrogatively. "He was within an ace of having his brain knocked out." "Tyr?" "Yes, she was nimbly up with that little axe she has at her waist. It was well for old Tyr that his master throttled him off." Christian went without a word to the corner where Tyr was chained. The dog rose up to meet him, as piteous and indignant as a dumb beast can be. He stroked the black head. Good Tyr, brave dog. They knew, and the man and the dumb dog had comfort of each other. Christian's eyes turned towards White Fell. Tyr's also, and he strained against the length of the leash of the chain. Christian's hand lay on the dog's neck, and he felt it ridge and bristle with the quivering of impotent fury. Then he began to quiver in like manner, with the fury born of reason, not instinct, as impotent morality as was Tyr physically. Oh, the woman's form that he dare not touch, anything but that, and he with Tyr would be free to kill or be killed. Then he returned to ask fresh questions. "How long has the stranger been here?" "She came about a half hour before you." "Who opened the door to her?" "Sven, no one else dared." The tone of the answer was mysterious. Why? Queried Christian. Has anything happened? Tell me. For answer he was told in a low undertone of the summons at the door, thrice repeated without human agency, and of Tyr's ominous howls, and of Swen's fruitless watch outside. Christian turned toward his brother, in a torrent of impatience for a word apart. The board was spread, and Swen was leading White Fell to the guest place. This was more than awful. She would break bread with them under the roof tree. He started forward, and touching Swen's arm, whispered an urgent entreaty. Swen stared and shook his head in angry impatience. Thereupon Christian would take no morsel of food. His opportunity came at last. White Fell questioned of the landmarks of the country, and of one Carn Hill, which was an appointed meeting place, in which he was due that night. The house mistress and Swen both exclaimed, "It's 3 long miles away," said Swen, "with no place for shelter but a wretched hut. Stay with us tonight, and I will show you the way tomorrow." White Fell seemed to hesitate. 3 miles, she said, then I shall be able to see or hear a signal. I will look out, said Swen. If there be no signal, you must not leave us. He went to the door. Christian rose silently and followed him out. Sven, do you know what she is? Sven, surprised at the vehement grasp and low hoarse voice, made answer, "She, who, White Fell?" "Yes, she is the most beautiful girl I've ever seen. She is a werewolf." Sven burst out laughing. "Are you mad?" he asked. "No, here, see for yourself." Christian drew him out on the porch, pointing to the snow where the footmarks had been. For now they were not. Snow was falling fast, and every dent was blotted out. "Well," asked Sven, "had you come when I signed to you, you would have seen for yourself." "Seen what?" "The footprints of a wolf leading to the door, none leading away." It was impossible not to be startled by the tone alone, though it was hardly above a whisper. Sven eyed his brother anxiously, but in the darkness could make nothing of his face. Then he laid his hands kindly and reassuringly on Christian's shoulders, and felt how he was quivering with excitement and horror. "One sees strange things," he said, "when the cold has got out into the brain behind the eyes. You came in cold and worn out." "No," interrupted Christian. "I saw the track first on the brow of the slope and followed it down right here to the door. There is no delusion." Swen in his heart felt positive that it was. Christian was given to daydreams and strange fancies, though never had he been possessed with so mad a notion before. "Don't you believe me?" asked Christian desperately. "You must. I swear it is saying truth. Are you blind? Why even Tyr knows?" "You will be clear-headed tomorrow after a night's rest. Then come to, if you will, with White Fell to the hill Carn, and if you have doubts still, watch and follow, and see what prince she leaves." Galled by Swen's evident contempt, Christian turned abruptly to the door. Swen caught him back. "What now, Christian? What are you going to do?" "You do not believe me. My mother shall." Sven's grasp tightened. "You shall not tell her," he said authoritatively. Customarily, Christian was so docile to his brother's mastery that it was now a surprising thing when he wrenched himself free vigorously, and as determinedly as Sven, "She shall know." But Sven was near the door and would not let him pass. "There has been scarce enough for one night already. If this notion of yours will keep, broach it tomorrow." Christian would not yield. "Women are so easily scared," pursued Sven, "and are ready to believe any folly without a shadow of proof. Be a man, Christian, and fight this notion of a werewolf by yourself." "If you would believe me," began Christian. "I believe you to be a fool," said Sven, losing patience. "Another who was not your brother might believe you to be a knave, and guess that you had transformed White Fell into a werewolf because she smiled more readily on me than on you." The jest was not without foundation, for the grace of White Fell's bright looks had been bestowed on him, on Christian never a whit. Sven's coxcombry was always frank, and most agreeable, and not without fair color. "If you want an ally," continued Sven, "confide in old Trella. Out of her stores of wisdom, if her memory holds good, she can instruct you in the orthodox manner of tackling a werewolf. If I remember right, you would watch the suspected person till midnight, with the beast's form, when the beast's form must be resumed, and retained ever after if a human eye sees a change. Or better still, Sprinkle hands and feet with holy water, which is certain death. Oh, never fear, but old Trello will be equal to the occasion. Sven's contempt was no longer good-humored. Some touch of irritation or resentment rose at this monstrous doubt of white fowl. But Christian was too deeply distressed to take offense. You speak of them as old wives' tales, but if you had seen the proof I have seen, you would be ready at least to wish them true, if also, not also to put them to the test. Well, said Sven with a laugh that had a little sneer in it, put them to the test. I will not object to that, if you only keep your notions to yourself. Now, Christian, give me your word for silence, and we will freeze here no longer. Christian remained silent. Sven put his hands on his shoulders again and vainly tried to see his face in the darkness. We have never quarreled yet, Christian. I have never quarreled, returned the other, aware for the first time that his dictatorial brother had sometimes offered occasion for quarrel, but had he been ready to take it. Well, says Sven emphatically, if you speak against Whitefell to any other, as tonight you have spoken to me, we shall. He delivered the words like an ultimatum, turned round sharp, and re-entered the house. Christian, more fearful and wretched than before, followed. Snow is falling fast, not a single light is to be seen. Whitefell's eyes passed over Christian without apparent notice, and turned bright and shining upon Sven. Nor any signal to be heard, she queried. Did you not hear the sound of a sea horn? I saw nothing and heard nothing, and signal or no signal, the heavy snow would keep you here perforce. She smiled her thanks beautifully, and Christian's heart sank like lead with a deadly foreboding when, as he noted, with a light was kindled in Sven's eyes by her smile. That night, when all others slept, Christian, the wary Sylval, watched outside the guest chamber till midnight was past. No sound, not the faintest, could be heard. Could the old tale be true of the midnight change? What was on the other side of the door, a woman or a beast? He would have given his right hand to know. Instinctively, he laid his hand on the latch and drew it softly, though believing that bolts fastened the other side. The door yielded to his hand. He stood on the threshold, a keen gust of air caught at him. The window stood open, the room was empty. So Christian could sleep with a somewhat lightened heart. In the morning there was surprise and conjecture when Whitefell's absence was discovered. Christian held his peace. Not even to his brother did he say how he knew that she had fled before midnight, and Sven, though evidently greatly chagrined, seemed to disdain reference to the subject of Christian's fears. The elder brother alone joined the bear hunt. Christian found pretext to stay behind. Sven, being out of humor, manifested his contempt by muttering not a single expostulation. All that day and for many a day after, Christian would never go out of sight of his house. Sven alone noticed how he maneuvered for this, and was clearly annoyed by it. Whitefell's name was never mentioned between them, though not seldom was it heard in general talk. Hardly a day passed but little Roll asked when Whitefell would come again. Pretty Whitefell who kissed like a snowflake. And as Sven answered, Christian would be quite sure that the light in his eyes rekindled by Whitefell's smile had not yet died out. Little Roll, naughty, merry, fair-haired little Roll. A day came when his feet raced over the threshold never to return, when his chatter and laugh were heard no more, when tears of anguish were wet by eyes that would never see the bright head again, never again living or dead. He was seen at dusk for the last time, escaping from the house with his puppy, in freakish rebellion against old Trella. Later, when his absence had begun to cause anxiety, his puppy crept back to the farm, cowed, whimpering and yelping, a pitiful dumb lump of terror, without intelligence or courage to guide the frightened search. Roll was never found, nor any trace of him. Where he had perished was never known. How he had perished was only known by an awful guess. A wild beast had devoured him. Christian heard the conjecture a wolf, and a horrible certainty flashed upon him that he knew what wolf it was. He tried to declare what he knew, but Sven had saw him start at the words with white face and struggling lips. And guessing his purpose pulled him back and kept him silent, hardly by his imperious grip and wrathful eyes, and one low whisper. That Christian should retain his most irrational suspicion against beautiful Whitefell was to Sven evidence of a weak obstinacy of mind that would but thrive upon expostulation and argument. But this evident intention to direct the passions of grief and anguish to a hatred and fear of the fair stranger, such as his own, was intolerable, and Sven set his will against it. Again Christian yielded to his brother's stronger words and will, and against his own judgment consented to silence. Repentance came before the new moon, the first of the year, was old. Whitefell came again, smiling as she entered, as though assured of a glad and kindly welcome, and in truth, there was only one who saw her fair face and strange white garb without pleasure. Sven's face glowed with delight, while Christian's grew pale and rigid as death. He had given his word to keep silence, but he had not thought that she would dare to come again. Silence was impossible. Face to face with that thing impossible. Irrepressibly he cried out, "Where's Roll?" Never a quiver disturbed Whitefell's face. She heard, yet remained bright and tranquil. Sven's eyes flashed round at his brother dangerously. Among the women some tears fell at the poor child's name, but none caught alarm for its sudden utterance, for the thought of Roll rose naturally. Where was little Roll, who had nestled in the stranger's arms, kissing her and watched for her sins and prattled at her daily? Christian went out silently. Only one thing there was that he could do, and he must not delay. His horror overmastered on a curiosity to hear Whitefell's smooth excuses, and smiling apologies for her strange and uncourteous departure, or her easy tale of the circumstance of her return, as to watch her bearing as she heard the sad tale of little Roll. The swiftest runner on the countryside had started out on his hardest race, little less than 3 leagues and back, which he reckoned to accomplish in 2 hours, though the night was more or less moonless, and the way rugged. He rushed against the still cold air till it felt like a wind upon his face. The dim homestead sank below the ridges at his back, and fresh ridges of snowlands rose out on the obscure horizon level, to drive past him as the stirless air drove, and sink away behind to obscure level again. He took no conscious heed of landmarks, not even when all sign of a path was gone under depths of snow. His will was set to reach his goal with unexplained speed, and thither by instinct his physical forces bore him, without one definite thought to guide. And the idle brain lay passive, inert, receiving into its vacancy, restless sifting of past sights and sounds. Roll, weeping, laughing, playing, coiled in the arms of that dreadful thing. Tear, oh tear, white fangs in the black jaw. The woman who wept on the foolish puppy, precious for the child's last touch. Footprints from pine wood to door. The smiling face among firs of such womanly beauty. Smiling, and Sven's face. Sven, oh Sven, my brother. Sven's angry laugh possessed his ear with the sound of a wind of his speed. Sven's scorn assailed more quick and keen than the biting cold in his throat, and yet he was unimpressed by any thought of how Sven's anger and scorn would rise if this errand were known. Sven was a skeptic. His utter disbelief in Christian's testimony regarding the footprints was based upon positive skepticism. His reason refused to bend in accepting the possibility of the supernatural materialize. That a living beast could be other than palpably bestial, pawed, toothed, shagged, and eared as such, was to him incredible. Far more that a human presence could be transformed from its godlike aspect, upright, free-handed, with brows and speech and laughter, the wild and fearful legends that he had known from childhood and that believed, he regarded now as built upon facts distorted, or relayed by imagination and quickened by superstition. Even the strange summons at the threshold that he himself had vainly answered was, after the first shock of surprise, rationally explained by him as malicious foolery on the part of some clever trickster who withheld the key of the enigma. To the younger brother, all life was a spiritual mystery, veiled from his clear knowledge by the density of flesh. Since he knew his own body to be linked to the complex and antagonistic forces that constitute one's soul, it seemed to him not impossibly strange that one spiritual force should possess diverse forms for widely various manifestation. Nor to him was it great effort to believe that as pure water washes away from natural foulness, so water holy by consecration must needs cleanse God's world from that supernatural evil thing. Therefore, faster than ever man's foot had covered those leagues, he sped under the dark, still night over the waste, trackless snow ridges to the fair church away, where salvation lay in the holy water stoop at the door. His faith was as firm as any that wrought miracles in the days past. Simple was a child's faith, wish, strong as a man's will. He had hardly missed during those hours every second of which was by him fulfilled to its utmost extent, by extremest effort that sinews and nerves could attain. Within the homestead, the easy moments went bright with words and looks of unwanted animation, for the kindly, hospitable instincts of the inmates were roused into cordial expression of welcome and interest by the grace and beauty of the returned stranger. But Sven was eager and earnest, with more than a host's courteous warmth. The impression that at her first coming had charmed him, that had lived since through memory, deepened now in her actual presence. Sven, the matchless among them, acknowledged in this fair white fell a spirit high and bold as his own, and as a frame so firm and capable that only bulk was lacking for equal strength. Yet the white skin was molded most smoothly, without such muscular swelling as well as might evident. Such love as this frank self-love could concede was called forth by an ardent admiration for the supreme stranger. More admiration than love was in his passion, and therefore he was free from a lover's hesitancy, a delicate reserve and doubts. Frankly and boldly he courted her favor by looks and tones, and an address that came a natural ease, needless of skill by practice. Nor was she a woman to be wooed otherwise. Tender whispers and sighs would never gain at her ear, but her eyes would brighten and shine if she had heard of a brave feat, and her prompt hand in sympathy fall swiftly on the axe haft and clasp it hard. That movement either fired Sven's admiration anew. He watched for it, strove to elicit it, and glowed when it came. Wonderful and beautiful was the waist, slender and steel strong, also the smooth, shapely hand, that curved so fast and firm, ready to deal instant death. Desiring to feel the pressure of these lands, this bold lover schemed with palpable directness, proposing that she should hear how their hunting songs were sung, with the chorus that signaled hands to be clasped. So his splendid voice gave the verses, and a chorus was taken up. He claimed her hands, and even through the easy grip, felt he desired the strength that was latent, the vigor that quickened the very fingertips. As the song fired her, and her voice was caught out of her by the rhythmic swell and rang clear on the top of the closing trees. Afterwards she sang alone, for contrast or in the pride of swaying moods by her voice. She chose a mournful song that drifted along in a minor chant, sad as a wind that dirges. Sad as a wind that dirges. Oh, let me go. Around spin wreaths of snow, that dark earth sleeps below. Far up the plain, moons on a voice of pain. Where shall my baby be lain? In my white breast, say the sweet life to rest. Lie where it can lie best. Hush, hush, it cries. Dense night is on the skies. 2 stars are in thine eyes. Come away, babe. Be lie thou, till dawn be gray. Who must be dead by day? This cannot last, but ere the sickening blast, and sorrow shall be behest, and kings shall be, lo, bending at thy knee, worshipping life from thee. For men long since to hope all of what's before, to leave the things of yore, mine and not thine. How deep their jewels shine! Peace laps thy head, not mine. Old Trella came tottering from her corner, shaken to additional palsy by aroused memory. She strained her dim eyes towards the singer, and then bent her head, that the one ear yet stabilized to sound might avail of every note. At the close, groping forward, she murmured with the high-pitched quiver of old age. So she sang my Thora at last and brightest. What is she like, she whose voice is like my dead Thora's? Are her eyes blue? Blue as the sky. So are my Thora's. Is her hair fair, and in plaits to be the waist? Even so, answered Whitefels herself, and met the advancing hands with her own, and guided them to corroborate her words by touch. Like my dead Thoris, repeated the old woman, then her trembling hands rested on the fur-clad shoulders, and she bent forward and kissed the smooth, fair face that Whitefell had turned nothing loth to receive and return the caress. So Christian saw them as he entered. He stood a moment after the starless darkness and the icy night air, and the fierce, silent 2 hours' race. His senses reeled on sudden entrance into warmth and light at the cheery hum of voices. A sudden, unforeseen anguish assailed him. as now first he entertained the possibility of having been overmatched by her wiles and her daring. If at the approach of pure death as she sat straight up at that bay transformed with a terrible beast and achieved a savage glut with no sword, at least. He looked with horror and pity by the harmless, helpless folk so uninviting to outrage to their comfort and security. The dreadful thing in their midst was veiled, was their knowledge by womanly beauty, was the center of pleasant interest. There before him, signally impressive, was poor old Trella, weak and feeble of all, in fond nervousness, and a moment might bring back all the revelation of a monstrous horror, of ghastly, deadly danger, set loose at bay in the circle of girls and women and careless, defenseless men. So hideous and terrible a thing that might crack open the brain or curl the brain home instead. And he alone on the throng prepared. For one sweeping breath he faltered, not following that, while over him swept the agony of compunction which yet could not make him surrender his purpose. He alone, nay, but Tyre also, and as he crossed to the dumb sole share of his knowledge. So timeless his thought for a few seconds only lay between us, lifting of the latch and his loosening of Ty's collar, but in those few seconds succeeding his first glance as lightning quick had been, the impulse of others, their motion was quick and sure. Sven's vigilant eye had darted upon, and instantly his every fibre was alert with the hostile instinct and half diving, half incredulous, of Christmas object and stooping to tear. He came hastily, wary, wrathful, resolute to office the malice of his well-dead brother. But beyond Sven Rose White fell, blanching white as her furs, and with eyes grown fierce and wild, she leapt down the room to the door, whirling her long-legged robe closely to her. Hark, she panted, the signal hark. Hark, I must go, as she snatched at the latch of the to be out and away. For one precious moment Christian had hesitated on the half-loose collar, for except the many womanly form were exchanged for the bestial Tyr's jaws would gnash to rags his honor of manhood. Then he heard her voice and turned too late. As he tugged at the door, he sprang across, grasping his flask, but Sven dashed forward and caught him back irresistibly, so the most frantic effort only availed to wrench one arm free. With that on the impulse of sheer despair, he cast at her with all his force. The door swung open behind her, and the flesh flew into fragments against it. Then, as Sven's grasp slackened, as he met the questioning astonishment of surrounding faces, with a hoarse inarticulate cry, "God help us," he said, "She is a werewolf." Sven turned upon him, liar, coward, and his hands gripped his brother's throat with deadly force, as though the spoken word could be killed so, and as Christian struggled, life lifted him clear of his few feet, and flung him crashing backwards. So furious was he that, as his brother lay motionless, he stirred him roughly with his foot, then till their mother came between eye shames. And yet, when he stood by the tea set, his brows knit, his hands clenched, ready to enforce silence and violence again, as Christian rose, staggering and bewildered. But utter silence and submission were more than he expected, and turned his anger into a contempt for one so easily cowed and held in the subject by mere force. "He is mad," he said, turning on his heel as he spoke, so that he lost his mother's look of pained reproach at the sudden free utterance of what you think it was hard, a lurking dread with her. Christian was too spent for the effort of speech. His hard-drawn breath labored in great sobs. His limbs were powerless and unstrung in utter relax after hard service. Failure in his endeavor induced a stupor of misery and despair. In addition was the wretched humiliation of open violence and strife with his brother, and the distress of hearing misjudging contempt expressed without reserve, for he was aware that Sven had turned to ally the sacred experiment half by imperious mastery, half by explanation and argument, that showed painful disregard of brotherly consideration. All this unkindness of his twin, he fell upon the charge upon the fell thing who had brought this in their first discussion. And most terrible, though interposed between them so effectually, but Swin was willfully blind and deaf on her account, resentful of interference, arbitrary beyond reason. Dread and perplexity, unfathomable dark about him. Unshared, the burden was overwhelming. A foreboding of unspeakable calamity, based upon his ghostly discovery, bore down upon him, crushing out hope of power to withstand impending fate. Svin, the while, was observant of his brother, despite the continual check of finding turn and glance when he would, Christian's eyes upon him, with a strange look of helpless distress, discomposing enough to the angry aggressor. Like a beaten dog, he said to himself, rallying contempt to withstand compunction. Observation set him wondering on Christian's exhausted condition. The heavy laboring breath and the slack inert fall of the limbs told surely of unusual and prolonged exertion. And then why had close upon 2 hours' absence been followed by open hostility against Whitefell? Suddenly, the fragments of the flask giving a clue, he guessed all, and faced about to stare at his brother in amaze. He forgot that the motive scheme was against Whitefell, demanding derision and resentment from him, and was swept out of remembrance by astonishment and admiration for the feat of speed and endurance. In eagerness to question, he inclined to attempt a generous part and frankly offered to heal the breach, but Christian's depression and sad falling gaze provoked him to self-justification by recalling the offense of that outrageous utterance against Whitefell, and the impulse passed. Then other considerations counseled silence, and afterwards a humor possessed him to wait and see how Christian would find opportunity to proclaim his performance and establish the fact, without exciting ridicule on account of the absurdity of the errand. This expectation remained unfulfilled. Christian never attempted the proud avowal that would have placed his feat on record to be told to the next generation. That night, Sven with his mother talked long and late together, shaping into certainty the suspicion that Christian's mind had lost its balance and discussing the evident cause. For Sven, declaring his own love for Whitefell, suggested that his unfortunate brother with a like passion, they being twins in love as in birth, had through jealousy and despair turned from love to hate, until reason failed at the strain, and a craze developed with that which the malice and treachery of madness made a serious and dangerous force. So Sven theorized, convincing himself as he spoke, convincing afterwards others who advanced doubts against Whitefell, fettering his judgment by his advocacy and by his staunch deference of her hurried flight, silencing his own inner consciousness of the accountability of her action. But a little time, and Sven lost his vantage in the shock of a fresh horror at the homestead. Trella was no more, and her end a mystery. The poor old woman crawled out in a bright gleam to visit a bedridden gossip living beyond the fir grove. Under the tree she was last seen, halting for her companion, sent back for a forgotten present. Quick alarm sprang, calling to remind the search. Her stick was found among the brushwood only a few paces from the path, but no track or stain, for a gusty wind was sifting the snow from the branches and hid all sign of how she came by her death. So panic-stricken were the farm folk that none dared go singly on the search. Known danger could be braced, but not this stealthy death that walked by day invisible, that cut off alike the child in his play and the aged woman so near to her quiet grave. Roll she kissed, Trella she kissed, so sang Christian's frantic cry again and again, till Sven dragged him away and strove to keep him apart. Albeit in his agony of grief and remorse, he accused himself wildly as answerable for the tragedy, and gave clear proof that the charge of madness was well founded if strange looks and desperate incoherent words were evident enough. But thenceforth all of Sven's reasoning and mastery could not uphold Whitefell above discussion. He was not called upon to defend her from accusation when Christian had been brought to silence again. But he well knew the significance of this fact, that her name, formerly uttered freely and often, he never heard now. It was huddled away into whispers that he could not catch. The passing of time did not sweep away the superstitious fears that Sven despised. He was angry and anxious, eager that Whitefell should return, and merely by her bright, gracious presence reinstate herself in favor, but doubtful of all his authority and example, could keep from her notice an altered aspect of welcome. And he foresaw clearly that Christian would prove unmanageable and might be capable of some dangerous outbreak. For a time, the twins' variance was marked, on Sven's part by an air of rigid indifference, on Christian's by heavy downcast silence, and a nervous apprehensive observation of his brother. Superadded to his remorse and foreboding, Sven's displeasure weighed upon him tolerably, and the remembrance of their violent rupture was its ceaseless misery. The elder brother, self-sufficient and insensitive, could little know how deeply his unkindness stabbed. A depth and force of affection such as Christian's was unknown to him. The loyal subservience that he could not appreciate had encouraged him to domineer. This strenuous opposition to his reason and will was accounted as furious malice, if not sheer insanity. Christian's surveillance galled him incessantly, and embarrassment and danger he foresaw as the outcome. Therefore, that suspicion might be lulled, he judged it wise to make overtures for peace. Most easily done. A little kindliness, a few evidences of consideration. A slight return of the old brotherly imperiousness, and Christian replied by a gratefulness and relief that might have touched him had he understood all, but instead increased his secret contempt. So successful was this finesse, that when late on a day a message summoning Christian to a distance was transmitted by Sven, no doubt of its genuineness occurred. When his errand proved useless, he set out to return. Mistake or misapprehension was all that he surmised. Not till he sighted the homestead lying low between the night-gray snow ridge did vivid recollection of the time when he had tracked that hard to the door, rouse an intense dread, and with it a hardly defined suspicion. His grasp tightened on the bare spear that he carried as a staff. Every sense of alert, every muscle strung. Excitement urged him on. Caution checked him, and the two governed his long stride. Swiftly, noiselessly to the climax he felt was at hand. As he drew near the outer gates, a light shadow stirred and went, as though the gray of the snow had taken detached motion. A darker shadow stayed and faced Christian, striking his lifeblood chill with the utmost despair. Sven stood before him, and surely the shadow that went was White Fell. They had been together, close. Had she not been in his arms, near enough for lips to meet? There was no moon, but the stars gave light enough to show that Sven's face was flushed and elate. The flush remained, though the expression changed quickly at sight of his brother. How if Christian had seen all? Should one of his frenzied outbursts be met and managed by resolution, by indifference? He halted between the two. As a result, he swaggered. White Fell? Questioned Christian, hoarse and breathless. Yes. Sven's answer was a query with an intonation that implied he was clear on the ground for action. From Christian came, "Have you kissed her?" like a bolt direct, staggering Sven by his sheer prompt temerity. He flushed yet darker, and yet half smiled over this earnest of success he had won. Had there been really between himself and Christian the rivalry that he imagined? His face had enough of the insolence of triumph to exasperate jealous rage. "You dare ask this?" "Sven, oh Sven, I must know you have." The ring of despair and anguish in his tone angered Sven. Misconstruing it, jealousy urging to such presumption was intolerable. "Mad fool," he said, constraining himself no longer. "Win for yourself a woman to kiss. Leave mine without question. Such an one as I should desire to kiss is such as one shall never allow a kiss to you." Then Christian understood his supposition. "Aye," he cried, "White Fell, that deadly thing. Sven, are you blind mad? I would save you from her, a werewolf." Sven maddened again at the accusation, a dastardly way of revenge. As he conceived and instantly for the second time, the brothers were to strive violently. But Christian was now too desperate to be scrupulous, for a dim glimpse had shot a possibility into his mind, and to be free to follow in the striking of his brother was a necessity. Thank God he was armed, and so Sven's equal. Facing his assailant with the bare spear, he struck up his arms, and with the butt and hit hard so that he fell. The matchless runner leapt away on the instant to follow a forlorn hope. Sven, on regaining his feet, was as amazed as angry at this unaccountable flight. He knew in his heart that his brother was no coward, and that it was unlike him to shrink from an encounter because defeat was certain and cruel humiliation of vindictive victor probable. Of the uselessness of pursuit he was well aware. He must abide his chagrin, content to know that this time for advantage would come. Since White Fell had parted to the right, Christian to the left, the event of the sequent encounter did not occur to him. And now Christian acted on the dim glimpse he had, just as Sven turned upon him, of something that moved against the sky along the ridge behind the homestead, was staking his only hope on a chance and his own superlative speed. If what he saw was really White Fell, he guessed she was bending her steps towards the open waste, and there was just a possibility that by a straight dash and a desperate perilous leap over sheer bluff, He might yet meet her or head her, and then he had no further thought. It was past, the quick, fierce race and the chance of death at the leap, and he had halted in a hollow to fetch his breath and to look. Did she come? Had she gone? She came. She came with a smooth, gliding, noiseless speed. There was neither walking nor running. Her arms were folded in her furs that were drawn tight about her body. The white lappets from her head were wrapped and knotted close beneath her face. Her eyes were set on a far distance, so she went till the even sway of her going was startled to a pause by Christian. Fell! She drew a quick, sharp breath at the sound of her name, thus mutilated, and faced Sven's feather. Her eyes glittered, her upper lip was lifted, and she shewed the teeth. The half of her name, impressed with an ominous sense as uttered by him, warned her of the aspect of a deadly foe. Yet she cast loose her robes till they trailed ample, and spoke as a mild woman. What would you? Then Christian answered with this solemn, dreadful accusation. You kissed Roll, and Roll is dead. You kissed Trella, she is dead. You have kissed Sven, my brother, but he shall not die. He added, you may live till midnight. The edge of the teeth and the glitter of the eyes stayed a moment, and her right hand also slid down to the axe haft. Then, without a word, she swerved from him and sprang out and away swiftly over the snow. And Christian sprang out and away and followed her swiftly over the snow, keeping behind but half a stride's length from her side. So they went running together, silent towards the vast waste of the snow, where no living thing but they two moved under the stars of the night. Never before had Christian so rejoiced in his powers. The gift of speed and the training of use and endurance were priceless to him now. Though midnight was hours away, he was confident that, go where that fell thing would, hasten as she would, she could not outstrip him nor escape from him. Then, when came the time for transformation, when the woman's form made no longer a shield against the man's hand, he could slay or be slain to save Sven. He had struck his dear brother in dire extremity, but he could not, though reason urged, strike a woman. For 1 mile, for 2 miles they ran, wife fell ever foremost, Christian ever at equal distance from her side, so near that now and again her outflying furs touched them. She spoke no word, nor he. She never turned her head to look at him, nor swerved to evade him, but, with set face looking forward, sped straight on, over rough, over smooth, aware of his nearness by the regular beat of his feet and the sound of his breath. In a while she quickened her pace. From the first, Christian had judged of her speed as admirable, yet with exulting security in his own, excelling and enduring whatever her efforts. But when the pace increased, he found himself put to the test as never had he been before in any race. Her feet indeed flew faster than his. It was only by a length of stride that he kept his place at her side, but his heart was high and resolute, and he did not fear failure yet. So the desperate race flew on. Their feet struck up the powdery snow. Their breaths smoked into the sharp clear air, and they were gone before the air was cleared of snow and vapor. Now and then Christian glanced up to judge by the rising of the stars and of the coming of midnight. So long, so long. Whitefell held on without slack. She, it was evident, with confidence in her speed proving matchless, as resolute to outrun her pursuer as he to endure till midnight and fulfill his purpose. And Christian held on, still self-assured. He could not fail, he would not fail. To avenge Roll and Trella was motive enough for him to do what man could do, but for Sven more. She had kissed Sven, but he would not die too. With Sven to save, he could not fail. Never before was such a race as this. Not when in old Greece man and maid raced together with two fates at stake. For the hard running was sustained unabated, while star after star rose and went wheeling up towards midnight, for 1 hour, for 2 hours. Then Christian saw and heard what shot him through with fear. Where a fringe of trees hung round a slope, he saw something dark moving, and heard a yelp, followed by a full horrid cry, and the dark spread out upon the snow, a pack of wolves in pursuit. Of the beasts alone he had little cause for fear. At the pace he held he could distance them, 4-footed though they were, but of Whitefell's wiles he had infinite apprehension. For how might she not avail herself of the savage jaws of those wolves, akin to as they were to half her nature? She vouchsafed to them nor look nor sign, but Christian, on an impulse to assure himself that she should not escape him, caught and held the back-flung edge of her furs, running still. She turned like a lash with the beastly snarl, teeth and eyes gleaming again. Her axe shone on the upstroke, on the downstroke, as she hacked at his hand. She had lopped it off at the wrist, but that he parried with the bear spear. Even then, she shore through the shaft and battered the bones of the hand at the same blow, so that he loosed perforce. Then again they raced on as before, Christian not losing a pace. Those left hands swung useless, bleeding and broken. The snarl indubitable, though modified from a woman's organs. The vicious fury revealed in teeth and eyes. The sharp, arrogant pain of her maiming blow caught away Christian's heed of the beast behind by striking into him. Close, vivid realization of the infinitely greater danger that ran before him into that deadly thing. When he bethought him to look beautiful, lo, the pack had but reached their tracks, and instantly slunk aside, cowed, the yell of pursuit changed into yelps and whines. So abhorrent was that fell creature to beast as to man. She had drawn her furs more closely to her, disposing them so that, instead of flying loose to her heels, no drapery hung lower than her knees, and this without a check in her to her wonderful speed, nor embarrassment by the cumbering of the fields. She held her head as before, her lips were firmly set. Only the tense nostrils gave her breath, not a sign of distress witness to the long sustaining of that terrible speed. But on Christian by now the strain was telling palpably. His head weighed heavy, and his breath came laboring in great sobs. The bare spear would have been a burden now. His heart was beating like a hammer, but such a dullness oppressed his brain that it was only by degrees he could realize his helpless state. Wounded and weaponless, chasing that terrible thing that was a fierce, desperate, axe-armed woman, except she should assume the beast with fangs and yet more formidable. And still the far slow stars went lingering nearly an hour from midnight. So far was his brain astray that an impression took him that she was fleeing from the midnight stars, whose game was by such slow degrees that a time equaling days and days had gone in the race round the northern circle of the world, and days as long might last before the end, except she slackened or except he failed. But he would not yet fail. But he would not fail yet. How long had he been praying so? He had started with the self-confidence and reliance that felt no need for that aid, and now it seemed the only means by which to restrain his heart from swelling beyond the compass of his body, by which to cherish his brain from dwindling and shriveling quite away. Some sharp-toothed creature kept tearing and dragging on his maimed left hand. He never could see it, but he could not shake it off, but he prayed it off at times. The clear stars before him took to shuddering, and he knew why. They shuddered at sight of what was behind him. He had never divined before that strange things hid themselves from men under the pretense of being snow-clad mounds or swaying trees. But now they came slipping out from their harmless covers to follow him, and mock at his impotence to make a kindred thing resolve to truer form. He knew the air behind him was thronged. He heard the hum of innumerable murmurings together, but his eyes could never catch them. They were too swift and nimble. Yet he knew they were there, because on a backward glance he saw the snow mounds surge as they grovelled flatlings out of sight. He saw the trees reel as they screwed themselves rigid past recognition among the boughs. And after such glance, the stars for a while returned to steadfastness, and an infinite stretch of silence froze upon the chill grey world, only deranged by the swift even beat of the flying feet, and on his own, slower from the longer stride and the sound of his breath. And for some clear moments he knew that his only concern was to sustain his speed regardless of pain and distress, to deny with every nerve he had her power to outstrip him or to widen the space between them, till the stars crept up to midnight. Then out again would come that crowd invisible, humming and hustling behind, dense and dark enough, he knew, to blot out the stars at his back, yet ever skipping and jerking from his sight. A hideous check came to the race. White fell swirled about and leapt to the right, and Christian, unprepared for so prompt a lurch, found close at his feet a deep pit yawning, and his own impetuous past control. But he snatched at her as he bore past, clasping her right arm with his one whole hand, and the two swung together upon the brink. And her straining away in self-preservation was vigorous enough to counterbalance his headlong impulse and brought them reeling together to safety. Then, before he was verily sure that they were not to perish so, crashing down, he saw her gnashing in wild, pale fury as she wrenched to be free, and since her right hand was in his grasp, used her axe left-handed, striking back at him. The blow was effectual enough, even so. His right arm dropped, powerless, gashed with, and the lesser bone broken, that jarred with a hard pain when he let it swing as he leapt out again and ran to recover the few feet she had gained from the pause at the shock. The near escape and the new quick pain made again every faculty alive and intense. He knew that what he followed was most surely death animate. Wounded and helpless, he was utterly at her mercy if she so should realize and take action. Hopeless to avenge, hopeless to save. His very despair for Sven swept him on to follow and proceed to kiss doom to death. Could he yet fail to hunt that thing past midnight out of the womanly form alluring and treacherous, into lasting restraint of the bestial, which was the last shred of hope left from the confident purpose of the outset? Sven! 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 Oh, Sven, he thought. He was praying, though his heart rung out nothing but this. Sven! Sven! Oh, Sven! The last star from midnight had lost half its quarters, and the stars went lifting up the great minutes. And again his greatening heart and his shrinking brain and the sickening agony that swung at either side conspired to appall the will that had only seemingly empire over his feet. Now Whitefell's body was so closely enveloped that not a lap nor a edge flew free. She stretched forward strangely aslant, leaning from the upright poise of a runner. She cleared the ground at times by long bounds, gaining an increase of speed that Christian agonized sequel. Because the stars pointed to the end was nearing, the black road came back behind again, and followed noising. They could but be kept quiet and still, nor slip their usual harmlessness, to encourage with their interest the last speed of their most deadly conqueror. What shape had they? Should he ever know? If it were not that he was bound to compel the fell thing that ran before him into her truer form, he might face about and follow them. No, not so, if he might do anything but what he did, race. And bear this agony, he would just stand still and die to be quit of the pain of breathing. He grew bewildered, uncertain of his own identity, doubting of his own true form. He could not be really a man, no more than that running thing was really a woman. His real form was only hidden under embodiment of man, but what it was he did not know, and Sven's real form he did not know. Sven lay fallen at his feet, where he had struck him down, his own brother. He stumbled over him and had to overleap him, and race harder because she who had kissed Sven leapt so fast. Sven, oh Sven. Where did the stars stop to shudder? Midnight else had surely come. The leaning, leaping thing looked back at him in a wild, fierce look, and laughed in savage scorn and triumph. He saw in a flash why, for within a time measurable by seconds, she would have escaped him utterly. As the land lay a slope of ice sunk on the one hand, on the other hand a steep rose shouldering forwards. Between the two was space for a foot to be planted, but none for a body to stand. Yet a juniper bough thrusting out gave a handheld secure enough for one with a wrestled grass to swing past the perilous place and pass unsafe. Though the first seconds of the last moment were going, she dared to flash back a wicked look and laugh at the pursuer who was impotent to grasp. The crisis struck convulsive life